Community Church from the Lyons family. We can't wait to see everybody and get back to church.
Stay healthy.
See you soon!
Please join me now in a word of prayer. We greet this new day with enthusiasm, thankful for the love which from our birth over and around us lies. Grateful, too, for the warmer, longer days, those early first signs of new life. We come alive as we witness trees budding, flowers blooming, as we do when we see our children playing and laughing. Even isolated, we have so much to be grateful for, including this time this morning. We say all these things remembering the words that Jesus taught his disciples to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Luke chapter 24, verses 13 through 49. That same day, 2 of Jesus' disciples were going to the village of Emmaus, which was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. As they were talking and thinking about what had happened, Jesus came near and started walking along beside them, but they did not know who he was. Jesus asked them, "What were you talking about as you walked along?" The two of them stood there sad and gloomy. Then one named Cleopas asked Jesus, "Are you the only person from Jerusalem who didn't know what has happened there these last few days?" "What do you mean?" Jesus asked. They answered, "Those things that happened to Jesus from Nazareth. By what he did and said, he showed that he was a powerful prophet who pleased God and all the people." Then the chief priests and our leaders had him arrested and sentenced to die on a cross. We had hoped that he would be the one to set Israel free, but it had already been 3 days since all this happened. Some women in our group surprised us. They had gone to the tomb early in the morning, but did not find the body of Jesus. They came back saying that they had seen a vision of angels who told them that he is alive. Some men from our group went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but they didn't see Jesus either. Then Jesus asked the two disciples, "Why can't you understand? How can you be so slow to believe all that the prophets said? Didn't you know that the Messiah would have to suffer before he was given his glory?" Jesus then explained everything written about himself in the scriptures, beginning with the law of Moses and the books of the prophets. When the two of them came near the village where they were going, Jesus seemed to be going farther. They begged him, "Stay with us. It's already late and the sun is going down." So Jesus went into the house to stay with them. After Jesus sat down to eat, he took some bread. He blessed it and broke it. Then he gave it to them. At once they knew who he was. He disappeared. They said to each other, "When he talked with us along the road and explained the scriptures to us, didn't it warm our hearts?" So they got right up and returned to Jerusalem. The two disciples found the 11 apostles and the others gathered together, and they learned from the group that the Lord was really alive and had appeared to Peter. Then the disciples from Emmaus told what had happened on the road and how they knew he was the Lord and when he broke the bread.
While Jesus' disciples were talking about what had happened, Jesus appeared and greeted them. They were frightened and terrified because they thought they were seeing a ghost. But Jesus said, "Why do you look so frightened? Why do you doubt? Look at my hands and feet and see who I am. Touch me and find out for yourselves. Ghosts don't have flesh and bones as you see I have." After Jesus said this, he showed them his hands and feet. The disciples were so glad and amazed that he could not believe it. Jesus then asked them, "Do you have something to eat?" Then they gave him a piece of baked fish. He took it and ate it as they watched. Jesus said to them, "While I was still with you, I told you everything written about me in the law of Moses and the books of prophets, and in the Psalms had to happen." Then they helped them understand the scriptures. He told them, "The scriptures say the Messiah must suffer, then 3 days later he will rise from death. They also say that the people of every nation must be told and named to turn to God in order to be forgiven. So beginning in Jerusalem, you must tell everything that has happened. I will send you the one of my Father has promised, but you must sit in the city until you get the power from heaven." Here ends the reading.
Hey, great job, Bella and Carly. Hey everyone, it's Mr. Scott. You know, one thing I've been doing quite a bit since I've been home a lot, puzzles. I love puzzles, and I'm actually working on one right now. I just started it. Come take a look. Can you guess what this is going to be? Probably pretty hard too. Let me add a few more pieces before you guess. All right, I got some more pieces in. Come take a look to see if you can guess what this is going to be. It's getting there. I think I know what it is, but I'm not 100% sure yet. So let me put some more in, and we'll see if we can figure out what this puzzle is. All right, one more piece. Done. It's the alien from Toy Story. Did any of you guess that at the beginning? You know, like all puzzles, the more pieces you put in place, the easier it is to see what's in front of you. It's kind of like our story today that Bella and Carly read. The two disciples that were walking down the road, they had left Jerusalem, and a man approached them. And they didn't know who this person was. Until the pieces started to come into place, did they realize what was in front, or who was in front of them. The first piece of the puzzle was this man started talking to the disciples about stories about Jesus. Yet the disciples didn't know who he was still. Then the man started talking about stories from the Bible that fit with the stories of Jesus, other stories from the Bible, and yet they still didn't know who this person was. And finally, as they invited this man into their home to eat, this man broke bread and prayed with them. And it was then, when all the pieces were finally together, that the disciples realized that this person with them was Jesus. The disciples then went back to Jerusalem and put the same pieces together for other disciples so they too would understand that Jesus was with them. You know, you and I can do that as well. When we learn about Jesus and we share his stories with other people, we are adding more pieces to the puzzle, and we create even a clearer picture of God's love in our lives. So I hope you continue to do that, and have a wonderful week.
I invite you now to let your heart soften a bit as we take a deep breath and pray this prayer, something I found a reflection on numbers. The numbers in the news every morning, the number of newly diagnosed cases, the number of victims Corona has claimed. I'm drawn to those numbers. I look for those numbers. I study them. I pay attention to those numbers. As those numbers go up, my spirit goes down. When the stats decline, the pace is slight and so slow. But those aren't the only numbers, and so this morning, I pray that we might be drawn to figures of a different kind. Gratitude. Gratitude for the number of people in my life who over the years have loved me, helped me, nurtured, and forgiven me. This day may I write them, call them, email them, Zoom them, and pray for them, and offer my heartfelt thanks. Let me also look for and find the number of times I'm nudged to serve the needs of others, at home, at work, in our neighborhoods, or wherever someone waits my helping hand. And then may I this day and every day notice the number of times my breath is taken away from me by the sheer beauty of it all. Oh, I'll still watch the news, scanning the numbers that fall and rise, day to day, from sorrow to joy. But may I and may we count just how fortunate we are, which is way more than any of us can number. This is my prayer. Amen. I've said this lots of times before, but I think it bears repeating. What we believe, what we hold precious is deeply personal. And the purpose of any of my sermons isn't to try to change your mind, to convince you that the way I see things is the right way or better than the way you see things. Now, I certainly don't mind rocking the boat from time to time, but sharing what I believe to be true and important matters to me. But each of us needs to come to our own convictions. And so my purpose today is simple, to help start a meaningful conversation about the stuff that matters. And today, my thoughts take me to that story from Luke 24, the reading that Bella and Carly shared with us earlier, the famous story of the road to Emmaus. If you grew up Catholic, you know that your first communion was a big deal, one of the first rites of passages that you celebrated on your journey toward adulthood. Lots of kids at Our Lady of Victory had parties after their first communion. Mine was largely unremarkable. About the only thing I do remember of that day long ago was how disappointed I was in the taste of that wafer. I had much higher expectations for the holy element. I do, however, really remember my first confession, sitting in a church, in a pew with my classmates, waiting, dreading, full of fear, rehearsing over and over, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." Now, I wanted my sins to be forgiven, but I didn't really want to reveal all the bad things I'd done. When it was finally my turn, I marched to the confessional booth like a lamb being led to slaughter. I settled in on the kneeler. Father Woodstock slid open the paneled door. I nervously began, "Bless me, Father." I remember that. I remember too the 5 Hail Marys and the 10 Our Fathers I had to do in penance. But my first communion, that didn't leave a lasting impression. I do, however, remember what is perhaps the most remarkable first communion story, shared in the book Angela's Ashes. Remember that story? It's the sad autobiography of Frank McCourt, mostly set in the depressing section of Limerick, Ireland, where Frankie grew up. So little Frank, after his first communion and first communion breakfast, he becomes sick. He throws up. His grandma is horrified. She shrieks at Frank, appalled that he has thrown up the very body of Jesus. Convinced now that the body of God is in their backyard, she sends Frank to confession to ask the priest what they should do, how they could remedy the situation. Now, most of us watching, we don't literally believe that we're consuming the body and blood of Jesus. That would be rather strange. For most of us, it's a symbolic meal. It reminds us of the life of Jesus and the costly nature of that life and love. But I wondered this week, reflecting on that passage from Luke 24, I wondered what Jesus might think of how communion has played out since he's departed. Sadly, a meal that was supposed to be so inclusive has been too often used to exclude people unless they can check off all the right boxes. The church I worked at in Baltimore was a wonderful church, but its Baptist theology was a little too stifling for me. You see, you couldn't come to the table unless you'd been baptized as a teenager or an adult, dunked in the dunking tank. I remember the day my daughter was baptized, 11-year-old Holly. She and her best friend were baptized on the same Sunday. It happened to be the first Sunday of the month. And that church, like we do, celebrates communion on the first Sunday. And so, after the baptism and the sermon, and it was time for communion, I began, as I stood behind the communion table, on the night that Jesus was betrayed, he took a loaf of bread, but then I stopped. Not because I couldn't remember what came next, but because suddenly I realized something I'd never really given any thought to. You see, my daughter Holly, before that day, she'd never been welcomed at the table of grace. And suddenly that just didn't sit right with me. And so I did something which is never a good idea, for me anyway. I went off script. I walked from behind the communion table, approached Holly and Emily, and I apologized. Not on behalf of the church, I didn't have that authority, but on my behalf. What really struck me as odd was this. That church thought of itself as inclusive, but it wasn't nearly as inclusive as it aspired to be. And Holly, little Holly, had been welcomed at our table, the dinner table, breakfast table, lunch table, before she even knew her name. Before she even realized she was our daughter, we fed her. We fed her even when she refused to open her mouth, and we had to play silly little games to get her to open. Here comes the choo-choo. Then there's one of my favorite communion stories, a story that Susan Brown has shared with me. Susan grew up Catholic. And on a number of Saturday nights, her best friend would spend the night with her. And her best friend wasn't Catholic, but they would go to church the following morning with Susan and her family. And when it came time for communion, of course, her friend had to stay behind. But when Susan returned to the pew, she'd take the host that she carefully held in her hand and break it and give half to her friend. Even as a young child, Susan realized that there was something fatally flawed with a meal or a sacrament or an institution that excluded people. I love that story. And then one of my favorite experiences is one that not all of you will agree with or appreciate. You see, it doesn't take place in a church. There's no bread broken or wine or grape juice consumed. But it has, to me, an Emmaus Road feel to it. A meal like that ancient meal that Jesus shared with the two disciples. Friends simply sitting down, enjoying each other's company, sharing a meal together. But right there in the midst of what is so ordinary, they had their eyes opened and they experienced the sacred significance of what was unfolding right in their presence. So my story takes place about 10 years ago. It was the night before I was going to run the Boston Marathon. We met our friend in Methuen. We figured it would be easier to get, much faster to get to Hopkinton from Methuen than from Gilford. And so we spent the night with Aura. When we arrived at her house, she welcomed us into her warm home. And after a little small talk, she invited us to the dining room, where the table was elegantly set. The lights were dimmed, but a candle at the center glowed. The dinner was a runner's delight. Pasta, lots of pasta and salad and bread. She first reached for Cindy's hand, then for mine. Then I was expecting to hear her say what a lot of people say when I'm having dinner with them. Michael, would you pray? But Aura surprised me with our eyes wide open and no head bowed. She looked first into Cindy's eyes and then into mine and spoke these words: "There is no place that I would rather be than with the two of you. Your presence makes this a sacred moment to me. I offer this simple meal that I made with joy as I thought about the two of you. May sharing it with you bring you the joy it has already brought to me." Those words, those simple words spoken with love, seasoned that room with grace and gratitude. And it was, at least for me, and I think for Cindy as well, one of the most genuine communion experiences we ever had. Communion is, after all, an intimate connection with another or others, centered around the stuff that matters. That dinner reminds me of the great words from one of my favorite songs, Holy Now. It goes this way: when I was a boy, each week, on Sunday we would go to church and pay attention to the priest. He would read the holy word and consecrate the holy bread, and everyone would kneel and bow. Today the only difference is everything is holy now. The poet, the songwriter, doesn't simply see a blank piece of paper or a pen. No, the poet, the songwriter, sees a living tree, dirt, soil, sun, rain. The poet, the songwriter, sees what we too often take for granted, but is right before us if we have eyes to behold, were we to slow down and to cherish the moment. And so my wish for each of you this day is simple. May the meal you enjoy, especially if it's shared with someone you love, may it be more than just food on a plate. As you savor it, may it be a doorway to the divine. And may it grace you not only by its sustenance, but with joy and pleasure. Amen.
When tears Hi everyone, this is Carl.
And Wanda, we're the Carters,
We miss being in church every Sunday.
but we'll be together again real soon.
Until then, be safe, be healthy.
Bye.
Bye.
Michael, just a quick note to thank you for your daily messages and also the sermon on Sunday. I do enjoy them, and thanks again for doing it.
Hi, it's the Buckleys. Today we've kept ourselves busy during quarantine by baking some cookies. It's Rachel Blanford's 24th birthday, so we bagged some up. We're gonna bring some over to her in a little bit. And now that I finished all the baking, my mom gets to do all the dishes.
Hi, everyone.
This is Rick
And Brenda.
Nelson, just saying hi to everybody at church, and we miss you guys, and we'll see you soon. Hang in there.
Sun, my sail, and moon, my rudder, as I ply the starry sea, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions, all we kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the lights of the heavens.